Hello. Today I'm going to read a little story from Devdutt Pattanaik Sita, an illustrated retelling of the Ramayana. So I'm going to read the story of liberation of Ahilya. When the yagna drew to a close, Vishwamitra said, "Let us go downstream to the hermitage of Gautama. We are needed there." Everyone followed Vishwamitra along a narrow rocky path lined with flower bearing trees until they came to a rock in the middle of dilapidated, neglected heritage. Vishwamitra then proceeded to tell its tale. So, till this part, Ram and Lakshmana are following Vishwamitra to go to the hermitage of Gautama. Ahilya, a beautiful princess with many suitors, was given in marriage to the sage Gautama, much older than her. Gautama spent all day conducting yagnas or performing tapasya, while Ahilya took care of his needs. She longed for his friendship and companionship, but he was too distracted to pay her any attention. Then, one morning, Gautama behaved very differently. Instead of going to the mountains to meditate after bathing in the river, he returned home and spent the afternoon with Ahilya, being extremely attentive, caring, and gentle, giving in to all her demands. So, in this part of the story, we can actually see that Gautama being much busy with meditation and was not actually giving much attention to Ahilya, and she longed for some friendship and companionship. And we can only imagine that how they must be staying during those times in the forest, all alone, isolated. So it was pretty normal for someone to long for some companionship, some social, or some friendship. So when one day Gautama behaves very differently, in a very friendly way, giving Ahilya the attention that she had always been craving. So it made her feel pretty good. But as evening drew close, Ahilya saw another sage who looked just like her husband approaching the house. The only difference was that the one outside looked stern and the one in her arms was extremely generous. It dawned on her that the loving man in her arms was not Gautama. He was an impostor. He turned out to be Indra, who had taken the form of her husband to exploit her loneliness. Her real husband stood outside. If we see the popular narrative of the story of Ahilya, a few people will say that Ahilya actually knew that it was Indra all along, and maybe she cheated knowingly. Others say that she was duped and she was too naive. But in this story, we see the aspect that she might not be that naive. Instead, she was a lonely woman craving some attention, and in the moment she received that from Indra in form of her husband, in the flow she just went with it. For some moment, her rational mind was overtaken by her emotional longing. Gautama was unforgiving. He cursed Indra that he would lose his manhood and that his body would be covered with sores. Then he cursed his wife that she would turn into stone, unable to move or eat. Animals would urinate on her, travelers would walk over her. If you, Prince of Ayodhya, touch her without judgment, she will be liberated from her curse, said Vishwamitra to Ram. But isn't adultery the worst of crimes? For it marks the end of trust. Renuka was beheaded for just thinking about another man. This is far worse, said Lakshman. So Lakshman retaliates, he says, that adultery is the worst of crimes. Just thinking about it is criminal. So Ahilya crime is of course much worse. How much punishment is fair punishment? Who decides what is enough? A king needs to intervene, balance his ruthlessness with compassion. Ram immediately touched the rock that was Ahilya. It moved, it stepped away, and she materialized, letting out a sigh, and then a wail, for she had been relieved of the burden of shame. So it's very well written. I particularly like the part where the king says, "How much punishment is fair punishment?" The law of justice demands that punishment should always be fair in proportion. We often forget this aspect that any punishment that we give out to a person, it always have to be in proportion of the crime and how much is enough. Often blinded in emotion, people, particularly in India, for any crime they will just demand capital punishment. For small crimes, for severe crimes, in some cases it may just be justified, in some cases it may not. So the fairness of punishment is a very important aspect that we always need to consider. What I liked about this particular story, the way Devdutt Patnaik has written it, is that he is neither presenting Ahilya as a woman to knife or a fool, and neither as an adulterous woman who was looking for to cheat. He beautifully presents her as a woman who has been longing for some company, who has been lonely, and for a moment she lost her sense of judgment. Both Ram and Vishwamitra, being enlightened, they understood it. Sometimes we need to be compassionate, and punishment always needs to be fair. This story always makes me wonder if Gautama was also at fault for neglecting his duties towards his wife. Was he at fault for treating her like a maid without realizing that he was also responsible for contributing to her emotional well being, given that she was living alone in a hermitage with little company in the middle of a forest? In pursuit of his spiritual goals, did Gautama abandon his responsibilities as a husband? Let me know what you all think. Do you believe that Gautama was fair? Do you believe in Lakshmana's stance that adultery is unforgivable and should be treated with the strictest punishment? Or do you side with Rama, who values fairness and forgiveness, especially when the sin is unintentional and occurs because of a lack of judgment and neglect rather than willful deceit? Please let me know. Thank you.